Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Korupati from Cambrian Lab. Today's topic is on how to build a better supply chain. We will be using a workflow-based approach to accomplish that. Today's agenda is broken down into roughly three parts. In the first part, we will do a brief intro about our company as well as the panelists. We'll discuss a little bit about what we have learned on building a better supply chain and in the current environment, especially after the last 3 years of what we would consider to be a supply chain crisis type of environment. We will do a short demonstration of a workflow-based approach to working with the supply chain and building a better supply chain. We have a short case study from one of our customers, and we will keep the last 10 minutes for Q&A. In terms of Q&A, the logistics of Zoom are as follows. It is very likely that you will have several points or questions throughout the session. For the sake of continuity, what we will do is pool all of those questions together and answer them in the last section. Okay, so if you have a point or a question, what we would urge you is to look at your Zoom bar, and the fifth tab on the Zoom bar is Q&A. If you can type in your question in the Q&A tab, we will have all of those collection of questions, and we can go one by one. My colleague Manish will try to answer by responding back to the question as well. But overall, we will cover all the questions in the Q&A tab in the last section of this session. Okay. With that, a little bit about Cambrian Lab. We are based out of California, in Northern California. We work with our customers who come from many industries, especially that have what we would consider to be largish supply chains, lots of commodities, lots of key suppliers to tier 2 suppliers, helping them build, distribute, and in many cases even service the products and other aspects of their operations. Okay. Many of us come from the actual customers ourselves, with quite a bit of experience in new product introduction, supply chain, supplier development, and quality. One of the things that we also have a bit of expertise is in core technology that supports supply chain operations. So based on that experience, we've developed certain tools to make life a lot easier for supply chain teams and suppliers. Okay. On the panelists, we have Justin Williams from Edgewell. He's going to come join in the later part of the session and share their experience of using workflow-based approach for working with the supply chain. I lead product at Cambrian Lab, have about 20 plus years of experience in manufacturing, supply chain, and in technology. Manish, my colleague, is also on the call. He also has 20 plus experience in automotive and software industries in terms of developing engineering solutions for supply chain problems. One of the things that we all probably agree, and we have seen within our customer base, is the last 3 years has been somewhat of a fog, what they call fog of pandemic, right? It was most of the actions were very reactive, responding to events, and there's nothing anybody could do about it. To say that it would be foggy would be an understatement. However, I'd say the last quarter of last year, perhaps even the beginning of this year, is officially or unofficially considered the end of the pandemic, right? Now we are in this new, what we call post-pandemic era. And it is an opportunity, and it's actually an imperative for many companies, and they feel that, is that we need to have a post-pandemic supply chain strategy. What is that? You can start with a clean sheet, or you can look at what have we done and what should we be doing to be better, right? And the big questions, when we talk to our customers or even general supply chain teams, is that one thing that they want to make sure is to understand better what are the lessons learned from the last 3 years. Secondly, has the organization absorbed those lessons learned, right? It should be part and parcel of how they move forward. And another big thing that people worry about, although it is something that is an unlikely event, but you still need to be prepared, is how will we do if there is another supply chain crisis, right? And the last one that I should really highlight here is one thing that we learned working with supply chain teams is that they are all burnt out. And you can be stretched for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, but not for 3 years, right? Running around and trying to really, put out fires and solve problems. And doing that for extended period of time can be very, very stressful. So it is super important for supply chain teams to be working in a normal operating environment, and everything should be not urgent or crisis oriented. So supply chain teams and leaders, they are definitely keen on making lives easier for their supply chain teams, right? And when in terms of lessons learned, one of the things that is quite obvious is the supply chains that existed during the pandemic and before the pandemic are just not optimal anymore, right? What is clear is that there is increased need for global and local supply chains, ideally an optimal combination, because when you can't rewire or redesign or rebuild supply chains, in a very short time. So you need to be able to still work with existing supply chains as well as develop new supply bases. Very important is know your supply chain. There's a concept in banking called know your customer, but I think supply chain teams, KYC it is called, but now I would say supply chain teams need to know their supply chain. Who are their suppliers, and perhaps even suppliers. Beyond that, I think it is very hard to understand, how the supply chains are evolving. You can try. If you have good suppliers, I think they will be able to provide some transparency into it. But it is important to at least know how your immediate supply chain and supply chain is supporting you. Super important is another, being able to work very closely with your suppliers. And it's in terms of when you're running into situations require your supplier attention, it is likely that a supplier that knows you well is willing to help and prioritize you as a customer, as opposed to a supplier that treats you as at an arm's length, using an arm's length relationship. So it is important to have close supplier relationships with as many as possible, or at least the appropriate suppliers. The other thing that I think some companies it might apply is, you may just have to have a different inventory strategy. More inventory in some cases will actually provide you with that type of resiliency if things remain uncertain in your industry and in your supply chains. One other thing that we heard loud and clear is, hey, we cannot just have one person or a small team be working with the suppliers. We need to have a very cross-functional engagement from engineering, finance, supply chain operations, and be able to have some level of relationship with the suppliers themselves. And final one is also a very important one, especially as you are thinking about, what is our plan A, plan B, and plan C. It is good to have plan A, plan B, and plan C on paper. Of course, at least it shows that you have given some thought to having alternatives. But it is also important to actually design those alternatives. In terms of engineering, many people just do it as a alternative component, but any process, any contract manufacturer, third-party manufacturer that you have as alternate needs to be tested, designed into the system. And every now and then it needs to be tested. Hey, can they do the job? Right? So you need to really plan, design, and test those alternatives. And it's all good. One of the things, the lessons learned that it is obvious is all of them point to having actually more suppliers, definitely better suppliers, and closer supplier relationships. And there is a reason why we put this picture here and who is going to bear this burden? Guess what? It will be your supply chain team, right? That is going to take on this, role of bringing in more suppliers, making existing and new suppliers better, and working closely with the suppliers, right? So all of this is more work, but it will be borne out by the supply chain team. You have to keep that in mind. Now, if there is going to be more work, obviously, it has to have some value. And a lot of research has shown, and we will include some links when we send it. And it is not only research and operational working style, when you're working very closely with suppliers, is just better in terms of your ability to, as an organization, to reduce total costs, much better performance from a supply chain perspective, metrics, on-time delivery, quality, performance would be higher. And importantly, your suppliers are also a source of innovation. And the closer you work with your suppliers, the faster you get their innovation into your products and operations. So the strategic value of building a better supply chain has always been there, right? It's just now it is an imperative to actually follow through on this. The good thing is, if you have thousands of suppliers, not all suppliers are created equal. Most of what we are talking about today applies to what, you can use any way of categorizing your suppliers or supply purchasing. But most of it applies to, I would call it strategic and non-strategic, partially suppliers. And perhaps even to the bottleneck and critical strategic suppliers if we're using this metrics, right? So this is a good simple example. One of our most famous products. How do they categorize? It's just our. It's nothing. We've estimated it to be like this, and based upon what we have, our supply chain, the good thing is, bulk of the suppliers are primarily routine, right? So you can do the current strategy of, procure to pay with them. However, once you move in, a part of the non-strategic suppliers and strategic suppliers require that same approaches that we are talking about. How do you, have more of the suppliers, have better suppliers, and how do we work closely with them? Okay, and this is, a strategy that a lot of our customers we've seen taking now as a supply chain strategy, as well as a supply chain team, or as well as an organization. And one of the things that they're running into is, oh man, it is hard. In most cases, nothing exists. We need to get a cross-functional and full organizational support for this effort. We need to be able to have suppliers buy into it and, engage with us. And most definitely, we are having a hard time using our existing solutions, right? There is no solution as such to help you do this. ERP solution is not going to help you build a better supply chain, right? If you have it working even. So that is a challenge that a lot of people run into, a lot of organizations run into. And some of the basic core things that you have to do are, if you're looking at an existing supply base, how are they Where do they fall? You can look at it from many angles, type of operations, commodities, and so on and so forth, right? Especially if you're an NPI, you do often bring in a lot of new suppliers. One of the things that you are continuously monitoring is, hey, do we need to do multi-sourcing? Do we need to replace at-risk suppliers? For, it can be just at a particular service or component that requires new suppliers. There's an at-risk component because of end of life. All of these require bringing in new suppliers, and for which you need to understand, how to understand, who is a good supplier versus what are the development requirements if you plan to work with a supplier. The other thing that we do a lot of times, sourcing needs are evolving and they continue to increase, right? Because of the need to bring in new suppliers or new NPI programs, new components, to be able to holistically do it and do it properly is a challenge in many cases, right? Many sourcing systems focus very narrowly on cost and, certain high-level metrics, but in most complicated sourcing agreements, there is a multifaceted approach that you need to take. Now, once you've select a supplier, it doesn't end the type of work that you have to do to make sure that the supplier is ready and is able to fulfill the need that you have that you're buying from them. Right? So it includes training and quality management audits. In some cases, you may even have to provide some money, and your teams will actually go on site. We've seen that a lot. And you bring them in, you help them get better at many of the things. So supplier development, especially if you are bringing in new supply bases in, it's almost as if you are building your own team in some cases, right? So there is quite a bit of work that you need to do to help them get ready and be better. Of course, once they are in fact a supplier, and today you will have a lot of suppliers currently working with you. One of the things that we have observed in the last few years is it is incredibly hard as an organization to work jointly and collectively with a supplier. There'll be a buyer doing something, sending an email about a purchase order, asking, hey, can you pull in a PO? Or an engineering person will send a drawing and get design for manufacturability analysis, things like that, right? So it is a lot of work that your whole organization does with the supplier, and it can be very tedious. So if you can simplify working with your suppliers on a cross-functional basis, not one by one, right? It makes life a lot easier. And once, of course, suppliers start working with you and they're providing you with the services, it is an extremely important element to be able to give them feedback. And the two best ways to do feedback is to provide supplier performance reporting, which is very quantitative, and suppliers performance assessment, which is done a little bit less frequently. However, it is extremely important for suppliers to understand, how does your organization perceive working with them, not just by how much have you shipped, and have you shipped on time, in full, and what are the wrong quality, so on and so forth. That's very quantitative. But as your organization works in a mere cross-functional manner, people have other expectations of supplier, and that can only be understood by doing assessments. Okay, so we've covered, what does it take to build a better supply chain? It's all good. I think if you do any of those things that we are highlighting, it's a good thing both for you or as an organization as well as your suppliers. But this is just a lot of, it can be quite a bit of work, right? For your supply chain teams, and it has to be made streamlined, simple, and easy. That would be a challenge. Otherwise, it just creates enormous amount of burden. What used to be work, it just can become a crushing stone, right, to your supply chain. So with that in mind, what we have done is, we've always provided within the industries that we serve a workflow engine designed for supply chain, but many companies have used it both internally and with suppliers. A workflow engine that to support such a goal of building a better supply chain. It has several elements or capabilities that make it possible. It does involve people and cross-functional teams together, pulls those teams together. Suppliers can be just like another colleague of yours. So everything happens with suppliers naturally. The other thing that is super important is we integrate this workflow engine to many of the core systems like ERP for purchase orders and engineering systems and supply chain systems for logistics and planning, so that the work happens naturally between people and the systems, and there's back and forth so that nothing is lost. The coordination is smooth. So generally what customers do is they've, because there are so many workflows, and we've categorized in different areas. People pick and choose what is important for them and use those workflows, design their own. A lot of times what people do is translate their supplier manual and all the supplier processes into these workflows, because it's something that your suppliers are used to using, right? There's no point changing that. So those are deployed as your QMS or your supply chain or supplier relationship manual workflows between you and your supply chain suppliers. Okay. So there are very lot of them. We'll cover some of those as part of the demo. What we'll do for the demo is look at some highlights. How do you go about reviewing your existing supply base in the first stage? We will look at how you could be doing a more holistic capability assessment as you're bringing in new suppliers. What are some of the processes that you can use to improve supplier readiness? Okay, and once the suppliers are, in and they're working with you on a day-to-day basis, what are some techniques that you can use to make that day-to-day work simple? And the last one we'll do is look at a supplier performance assessment and how you can use that to provide extremely good feedback and some level of quantitative approach to help suppliers understand where the improvement opportunities are, right? And follow through with more supplier actions and so on. So with that, what I will do is open the system, okay? And I have two different systems here, two browsers. Hopefully you're able to see them clearly. One is, recall to the right is internal facing, which is, your teams, your cross-functional teams within your organization are the ones that are using it, right? Okay, so there are lots of workflows from engineering all the way to supplier quality and the full, the collaboration with suppliers. And this is for your internal organization to use this view of the workflow engine, okay? And to the left is actually what suppliers see, okay? Same thing. However, they have a different view into it. It's their relationship with you. So each supplier that you're working with can actually, depending upon the type of work that they do, access and interact with you along different workflow and workflow needs, process needs, okay? So this is the supplier and this is for internally. Okay, so let's start with, what is our supply base and how are they doing, right? So when we look at our supply base here, we have a lot of different suppliers, right? We have some manufacturers, some contract manufacturers, distributors. These are all the suppliers that you actually have purchasing relationships, right? So, and one of the things that you've done is, also looked at the different types, categories. Importantly, you've also evaluated their capability, how they're doing because they're existing supplier, and the type of relationship status. All of these things will determine, whether how much business they do, what are likely to be new business, how to prioritize suppliers for new business, and importantly, what is the room for improvement for very specific suppliers. You can also do a little bit of slice and dice here, so that to understand, what is the overall supply base, and where do they fall, right, in terms of capability, performance, and once it's a good thing that there are fewer that require improvement, but there's none that has actually achieved excellence in terms of this thing. So this actually really gives you an idea of where you should focus your efforts, right, in terms of supplier development. The other aspect of it is a lot of teams are actually now looking at what is our product, where do we need new suppliers. If you're doing NPI suppliers, you can also do that. So that again will you can start to look at our NPI programs and also try to understand where are our supply chain needs. Right? If I look at this phone and look at a supply chain assessment for this new phone program, you can see all the different components and what is the supply chain status of that, right? So you have procured, there is no supplier yet. Many of them have multi-sourced, but there are several that are still single sourced, right? So you have to start thinking in terms of, where is my, focus should be, especially if you're launching new programs all the time, or looking at existing products in terms of, multi-sourcing and improving resiliency of existing suppliers. There is also other approaches that we provide, especially to know your customers. And we say, know your supply chain, sorry. So there is a way, we provide some tools to map out, let's see, where is it? The full supply chain and understand, in many cases, you can also understand what the risks are at different nodes. So here is an example where, you're using several supply chain parties and nodes to fulfill a particular region, right? And way below here are certain suppliers that are providing, chips, and the chips themselves are made by, or actually packaged and tested by other companies that you need to know, right? Where, and this is something that your suppliers may be able to share. So just so that you understand, where are some of the risky points that you have. You're not going to solve it, but at least you should know. Okay. So do you need to really understand your supply chain as a supply base level for new product programs or specific existing product programs, as well as just to fulfill demand, right? What is our supply chain to fulfill demand? You can use different techniques to do that. The one thing that we do here is, a lot of times new supplier requests can come, whether it be from engineering or your MRO teams, or just any place within the organization. They'll request a new supplier and say, hey, we need to bring them on board. And one of the things that you can do in Zflow here is you can set that up as a cross-functional process. So we'll say, hey, we're going to request you request a new supplier, but we'll do a few steps in between. We'll look at purchasing review. Depending upon the type of need, we will do a capability assessment, risk analysis. So, and once it's all done, we'll set up the approved. If all the parties approve it, we'll set up the contract, create the vendor in SAP, and that's how vendors come to life, right? This can be designed in and actually followed through by the whole organization. So it makes life a lot easier for supply chain teams because there's a more systematic approach, and the different people that are involved in that are automatically included, pulled in to do appropriate activities, and they will complete it following the process that is outlined here, right? So this is something that your team usually designs and says, hey, this is how we are going to do it, and going forward, people will be using this. The important thing is I'm going to, let's say, the request has already come in, and now I notice that the supplier capability score is at 83. We are today at this activity where we are going to be doing some risk analysis, right? These are the different risk assessment attributes that we want to measure. So, however, we notice that, hey, there was a capability score that was created. Where did that come from? Okay, so part of the workflow that you've noticed here is in step number 5, there was a supplier capability assessment that was done. And that was actually done using another workflow, which is simple, right? There is, because this supplier does involve multiple aspects of cost, quality, and service level, we've said, okay, hey, we're going to ask the appropriate teams from engineering and supply chain to provide you assessment score, right? And the various facets of assignment capability assessment include all of this: cost, initial cost reduction. We look at the quality responses, service level includes lead time and minimum order quantities, what their evaluation criteria is. So based on what people provide, the capability assessment workflow actually calculated the score. Hey, this new supplier capability is 83, right? So that's how you can integrate both quantitative techniques as well as cross-functional workflows together to really evaluate suppliers when they're bringing them on board, right, for specific needs. So once that's how I do it. Now that the supplier is in, it is not done yet. You may have to do some readiness activities. We have generally several types of industry standard or your own readiness processes that you can design. Whereas the most common one, of course, is like audits, right? So if you're going to be doing audits, you're going to be sending out questions to suppliers saying, hey, can you fill in, provide information about this and add anything, right? So there's an audit workflow that can be used within the organization and with your suppliers, right? So here is a workflow where we've set up the audit and we've actually sent the audit to the supplier saying, can you fill it out? Suppliers, so it's at this point, then they are thinking of, okay, I got an email that I need to go in and fill out. So when they log in here, so I'm going to be showing it to you. So they get an email saying, hey, you need to do this activity. So there are a lot of these activities as part of workflows that they naturally get pulled in. Okay. And and they can perform these activities as your day-to-day workflows, right? It's something that happens. It's like they're your extended team member. Okay, so if they get an activity for audits, they can. I'm going to look at it here. Generally, by the way, they usually come via an email. So when they come in, they can fill in their answers here. Okay, I will do quality manual. Yes. So on, save it and send it back to you, right? So it's very, very natural for suppliers to participate in these workflows, whether it be audits or corrective actions, whatever their actions are, they can actually come in and do it. The next thing, of course, is when you're thinking in terms of readiness, you also have more elaborate approaches such as PPAP, right? Purchase Production Part Approval Process. So you can also design them as PPAP processes where they will come in and provide you with suppliers, fulfill the needs of the PPAP. This can be initiated by suppliers, or you can initiate and pull in the suppliers to provide this. And here, these workflows can be, using more of an appropriate industry standard stage gate approach, where you would do phase 1 reviews, phase 2 reviews. There could be a lot of activities in these phases between you and the suppliers. For example, if I look at the kickoff, these are all the things that between you and the supplier, the tasks that are happening, right? So it's a lot more elaborate in terms of how you would want to make sure that the supplier is ready. Because at the end of this PPAP process, the supplier components are ready for production. Their production process is validated, their design is validated, and they have everything in place to send you production materials, right? You are signing off, they are ready. So it can be a very simple process to very, very elaborate in terms of how ready your supplier should be. The next one, of course, is once they are in business with you, they are doing day to day, right? There's like forecast, there's purchase orders that are going on, being given to them, and they may want to submit some changes. So you can also make sure that the suppliers are actually able to participate in those decision-making or day-to-day work with you with respect to this. A good example here is a purchase order, right? So here, once a purchase order is released, it automatically, through this workflow portal, sends it to the supplier. They can actually come in and based on the workflow, we said, hey, suppliers can change the PO once it's issued, right? So what you've decided is what are the types of changes that you're allowing suppliers to do, right? It could be schedule changes, quantity changes in the schedule, new quantities that they're accruing. So if there's one thing that we have learned in the last 3 years, that a purchase order is not necessarily a firm purchase order anymore, because there are lots of changes that are happening because of the uncertainty around the need, what they're able to fulfill and so on. So suppliers need to be able to submit those changes, and you need to, as an organization, review those changes, either accept them or work it out with the supplier, what is acceptable from a change perspective, right? So this happens like day in and day out, over thousands of POs, and you can think about the amount of load that it places on your supply chain organization. And one of this is, many people need to know about this, and the systems need to be integrated. So this is where the workflow engine is pretty capable to really seamlessly work with your systems, right? Generally, most of our customers seem to have SAP, so we connect this to SAP, and it actually gets the POs, gets the vendor. So everything from then onwards is integrated. It's a seamless process between purchase order release to it coming through, flowing into the system, and collaborating with the suppliers for all the changes that are accepted. Okay, so it's on a day-to-day basis. That could span between POs, forecasts, subcontract POs, batch manufacturing records. If you're in, pharma or food, they all need to submit it. So it can be anything and everything on a day-to-day basis that you want to engage with suppliers, you can actually do it, right? So this is where the supplier is submitting the batch BMR and it comes in, you accept that batch, and from then onwards, it can be shipped and received within our organization, right? So things of that, day-to-day work, it needs to be made simple because you're already putting a lot of work. And the last thing you want to do is put more non-value added work on your supply chain teams and your suppliers, to tell you the truth. And this makes it a lot more convenient and simplifies that whole day-to-day work that happens. Similarly, quality, supplier actually, I'll skip that for now. So now that suppliers are working with you, it is very, very important to give them feedback. Hey, how are you doing? And the feedback can be two ways. One is, we've actually created a supplier scorecarding automation so that as and when appropriate information is made available, you can share that with your suppliers. That can be in the form of performance reports that they can come in and access. So if you look at it, the last 3 periods, this is a quarterly report, meets expectation, but in the last period, most recent period, it is fallen down. And, they can also understand, exactly where that scores are coming from, what are the elements of those scores, right? So this is one way. This is very quantitative. It's something that's calculated and shared automatically with the suppliers. And you can put it in a real time or monthly basis or weekly basis, it doesn't matter. Okay. The other approach, which we also think is very, very powerful, is to use supplier performance assessments. This is a little bit more involved, happens a little bit less frequently, right? And involves internally your team coming together and evaluating the performance of the supplier. So we call that supplier performance assessment. And the way that works is, we are going to be looking at this. For example, we are using what is called a performance assessment framework. And using that, we send out a specific set of questions, right? For example, these are all the 16 questions that we have around different areas: NPI support, delivery and supply, and different people can give different, basically, so, your supply chain team knows a lot more about your supplier's delivery capability, whereas your component team, knows a lot more about how do they provide NPI support. Your component team also knows about costing, right? So different people interact with your suppliers and experience their performance differently. And what you want to be able to do is get their input and then say, hey, what is and using that, you would actually provide an assessment to the supplier saying, hey, this is our rating, how you are doing. And, the overall rating is 6 point. I mean, right now, if you look at it, so far, what we know is the component engineer has given it, but the assessment is not completed. So once the assessment is completed, you can give a full picture of this to your suppliers. And this performance assessment is something that you have to customize for a specific type of suppliers and specific support that they provide. For example, so if you look at the performance frameworks that we have here, we have one for commodity manufacturers, one for contract manufacturers, one for hub, ODM, and so on, right? So if you look at contract manufacturer, there are a lot more involved because of the type of work that they do. And you can have, NPI programs under quality, there are, yield audit, so on and so forth, right? So there is more that can be in terms of evaluating a lot more comprehensive the type of supplier that you do. Whereas commodity manufacturers, you're primarily buying from them, and they're all responsible for their own design and so on. So you can use different frameworks to do assessments and provide that feedback to your suppliers. Okay. With that, what I'll do is we have Justin just joined. I will give Justin, Justin will share some of their experience. They have a few third-party manufacturers that use these workflows to to jointly work with Edgewell. Justin?
Hey, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so my name's Justin Williams. I'm with Edgewell Personal Care, and we work with Chris and his team to implement this portal for our suppliers. At the moment, we're currently using it for the purchase order collaboration that he was briefly talking about before this one. That's the one we've implemented so far, and like he said, we have 3 suppliers right now that are onboarded already, working in production to collaborate for purchase orders. And then we're rolling that out to our other suppliers as well. We just started with a few and have had them working for about 3 months now in there to make sure everything was going good before we moved it to everyone else. So, but we had kind of some of the same problems that Chris was explaining, where some of the values in the purchase orders were changing quite frequently over time, and it was becoming a burden to the team to manage that. We use SAP, so they were manually updating purchase orders within SAP, repeatedly, basically. So we implemented this, and it's been working great. We have allowed them to change most of the stuff Chris showed, so they can update pricing, they can update any of the delivery information, like the date or the quantity. They can split the deliveries there. So if we have 5,000 units and they want to change that to 2 deliveries of 2,500, they can do that. And then whatever changes they make, they can also put in some notes and explanation and then send that over to our internal teams that review that. So once they approve it, it updates the purchase order directly in SAP. And then they can actually send it back and forth. So one thing that's worked out really nice is if we have a purchase order that's, for a few months out in the future, and then something changes, they have to move some stuff around. They make those changes, it updates SAP, so all the planning can happen properly. And then, maybe another month down the road, something else changes, they can go back and re-collaborate on it. So that's been working pretty well. And like I said, yeah, it integrates with SAP as well. So any change is immediately effective in SAP. So we don't have emails kind of going back and forth and then someone having to go update SAP after the fact. And the suppliers actually really like it too, because they can see the data that's from our system that's exactly right there. And then whenever updates are made, they can still see those POs with the exact information from our system as well.
Yep.
I don't know if I have anything else on that one. The only other thing I mentioned, I guess, is we are planning also to expand to some of the other flows that Chris has shown out here. We just have not made it that far along yet.
Yeah. So thanks, Justin.
Yeah, no problem.
Anything
else you want me to cover, Chris, or?
No, I think that's good. I think it might help, the types of suppliers that you have, and where this type of approach would be most beneficial. So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So we have two different types of suppliers at the moment that we're using this for. One is for components like plastic bottles and tubes and stuff like that. And then the other one is a third-party manufacturer that's actually doing manufacturing for us. So both of those types are working well with it. So far, that's really that's the main focus of the types of suppliers too that we're looking for. So
yeah.
So like packaging, raw materials type stuff, and then the third-party manufacturers.
Great. Yeah. Hey, thanks, Justin.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So, you know what, that's, as I was indicating, you know, the types of suppliers where they're what we would consider to be a full life cycle of relationship, right? Which is, you know, they are, you know, part of your design process, and then they are making or assembling, testing for you, and you know, they're provisioning, or sometimes they buy on your behalf, or you know, you provide them with part of the raw materials, but they can also purchase their own to bring it and package, assemble, or manufacture goods for you, right? So those are the types of scenarios where it does help to have something like this, you know, and to work with them seamlessly across the full life cycle, not just I'll send you a PO, or what we have seen is, you know, it's not uncommon to find by this whole supplier, what you would call life cycle, spread over 6-7 systems and completely disjointed, with 80% of the work happening via email and phone calls and so on. So one of the things that it's become important, because a lot of the supply chain work now is happening also to a certain extent virtually. There is still need for your supply chain teams to visit your suppliers. I don't think we will discount that. But you can, you know, there is definitely a split now, and the workflow-based approach has proven to be fairly effective to work as almost like your as an extended team of your organization with suppliers, and that's how, you know, they see themselves, or you see your suppliers, right? So again, you know, this may be an overkill if all you want to do is buy you know, a few laptops or you know, some paper, etc. I don't think that is what this is. This is more for your suppliers where you have a, you know, long-term relationships, or a relationship that spans more than just buying. Okay, so with that, we'll open it up for questions. We already have a couple. There was a question about what is an acquisition approach of buying a key supplier? What about an acquisition approach? I will try to understand that question. I'm assuming this is, can we use a process to buy a key supplier? Yeah, I mean, of course, you can set up a workflow and go through the due diligence, and you know, buying a supplier is, I'm assuming, is almost coming close to now, you know, having a very deep relationship, right? So you can do that, but it happens so infrequently that something, you know, you may just want to do it. So using any approach that you today have instead of just designing something, you know, if you do, however, routinely buy this, it makes sense to actually set up a workflow to, hey, how do we acquire our suppliers? So it's not uncommon in some places where the tooling actually is a very elaborate process in terms of agreements and you know, how the tool is used, and you know, the amount of usage. We have seen some workflows to support such scenarios. But yes, you can do it, but you should think about, you know, am I going to use it how many times, and should it be a method that is applicable, that we can be used routinely. There's another question about Is this a SaaS type solution or on-prem deployable? Actually, this is not a SaaS. However, all of our customers run it within their own Azure or AWS environments, which means they already have their accounts. And it runs within their environment on those clouds. So you own the data. It's complete security. Everything that you have in terms of policies apply to this solution too. So we actually have a few customers that support high-tech customers that are deploying it themselves because of for sensitivity, IP, and data protection reasons. It's all their solution, and it can be set up on GovCloud. The requirements for the solution are fairly minimal, and they're already supported in both Azure and AWS GovClouds. In terms of integration, because it is set up within the environment, generally integration works through what I've shown. It can be connected. However, this workflow engine needs to be able to see that environment, your ERP solution. So that means it can be on the same network, or at least a way for it to communicate. And most of the communication happens via APIs. Actually, all of it only via APIs. We only talk to other solutions via API. A good example here is, like, for example, get forecast, right? Get POs. So this is nothing but a API within SAP, right? That gives, a PO number for a supplier. Get vendors means you get all the vendors from SAP. So these are, same thing with Salesforce, for example, right? Get accounts, get opportunity items, and so on. So these are done using APIs. So that means, if the system are visible to each other, integration can be accomplished. There is a question, is a P2B system called in China? Yeah, of course, you can use it in China. You will have to deploy it there. And, as I indicated, you connect to external systems using APIs. Their APIs can come in different formats, like, REST APIs, or in the case of SAP, they're accessible through another technology called RFCs. There are web services, all types of APIs. We support using the API-based integration approach. The other system whether it is procure to pay or supply chain planning or ERP, will have to have those APIs available. In the case of SAP, there are thousands of APIs that are available, so you can pretty much, do anything that you want. Okay, we have a couple more minutes for questions. Just as a closing statement, we do have, if you have been, interested in this and trying it out, there are a couple of approaches to do that. You have a free trial, which we will have it to run it for you, or you can say, I want to do it a pilot where you can deploy the solution within your AWS or Azure environments, and it'll serve your needs. Design your own workflows, design your own strategies for supply chain, and test it out there. Two modes of testing. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out to us, and we will support the process. So we have 1 more minute. We'll keep it open for questions. While we are looking for questions, thing that you'd want to keep your email check is, if you're interested to look at the videos and the presentation material, we will be sending it out again tomorrow or slightly after. The moment Zoom releases the video, they'll send a link to us. We will put together all the material, the Q&A, the answers together, and send out these details to you. We'll have our contact information if you would like to reach out to us with any questions specific to your organization. We would be more than happy to answer them and even set up like a one-on-one session if needed. Okay, with that, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you for joining, taking 1 hour out of your day, and hopefully it was very useful, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future session. Thank you.